From the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased joining me, Joel Quintela. Joel, thank you very much for being here with me today. The way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. Tell us a bit more about you, your journey, your experience. It's a very rich one, but I always prefer my guests to share that. And we're going to talk about a topic which is, I think, very, very, very important. Perception to reality. Just I'm giving some hints to the audience, but I gotta keep it to you, and then we can start the discussion from there. So the floor is yours.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you. So my background is I'm a business psychologist, but I started off as a computer systems engineer. So that means high school and even into college, and then I found psychology and just went. And it seems like it's a 180, computer programming versus psychology, but it isn't. It also helps me as a company set up some technology for Fortune 500s to help them hire better people. So it's typically we're implementing assessments like a personality assessment, an IQ test, a role play, interviews, so that our companies can hire better people, which means more money for them. But hiring is a predictive, game. You have to, you don't know if I'm, interviewing today, whether you're going to do well in 3 months or 6 months. So I have to do whatever I can during the hiring process to increase the probability of my correct answer. So, for example, if you're just doing informal interviews, you might as well just flip a coin, because you're just not going to make the right decision. So there's a better way to interview to make better decisions, and that's the kind of stuff we help. Our companies, they're typically Fortune Global 500s. They're doing a lot of hiring, and for them it's maximize hits and minimize misses, essentially. And there's a way to do that. There's a way to increase probability of success.
Cool.
What about you? India.
Great. Thank you, Joel, again for being here with me today. Just, as a joke, there's a saying, here in the region where I live, it's like when you buy a watermelon, you don't know how it's going to look inside.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like this, came to my mind. But Joel, let's start. The way I love to dissect, any topic is to go back to the roots of the problem, right?
Yeah.
So trying to see, and hiring. I discussed this a couple of times, here on the show, and it was always one of these topics that people have perception about it also as well, I would say.
Yes.
So let's start to dissect and see what are the main problems that organizations face when they go with the traditional approach of hiring without assessments. And maybe this is what pushed you, and you spotted something that said, okay, I need to be doing something about this. So I would love to hear, the background of the story, why you came out and decided to pursue this.
Yeah, excellent. I actually just fell in love with psychology in general, social psychology, but I didn't want to just sit in an ivory tower and just talk about things for days and, without any real solutions. So I wanted to take what I was learning in those graduate school and actually apply it to the real world. And, what better place to do it than in the workplace, because you're probably spending more time at work than you are at home. So it's a huge impact in your life. And what we wanted to do is just make sure that our companies are making better hires. So that not only helps the company themselves, but also the individual. So you as an individual shouldn't be in a role that you shouldn't be in. So it is a communication, but the hiring is arguably one of the most important things that a company can do to make sure that they succeed and excel. So that became pretty obvious to me. I mean, mainly because I worked around in different places, and some of them didn't work out, and eventually I find out that I'm not really employable, I guess, right? So I decided to build my own company and try to help others, do better. But for me, it was more a motivational thing versus an ability. So performance in the end is a function of ability and motivation that's in an environment. But I was noticing quickly that, my motivation was different in different companies, even though I was doing the same exact thing. So in one company, I was doing very well. In some other company, I wasn't doing very well. So I started thinking, oh, wait a minute, what's happening here? It's not that I'm changing. It's just the environment is changing and the requirements of the role are changing. So there must be a direct link between what's required of the role and the person to make sure that person not only stays, but also excels in the role. Because I saw me, and it paid off for me and it paid off for the company. I just need more money for the companies, where eventually I said, I'd prefer not to make other people rich now. I'm going to just switch it and do my own thing, just like this, right? Because it's a big issue. And it's very, it's a very real value. And, if you hire better people, you make more money. If you hire bad people, you lose money. And it's worse for a small entrepreneur. A price of a bad hire for a small company is huge. It's much more devastating than if Walmart makes 100,000 bad hires, because they just have to make 200 good hires, right? 200,000 good. And, we put them on the floor of the store and, they can make you a lot of money. But if you're an entrepreneur and you have a small team and you make a bad decision, that's going to impact your entire company, from not only the customers, the company itself, the morale of your teammates, just the entire flow of the company is disrupted if you make a bad hire. But the problem is, most entrepreneurs, and me included, think that I know the best, think that I know who to hire. And whatever I decide is going to be a great hire. That's not true. It's not true. Because there are things you should be doing in that conversation to make sure you're making a good decision. But most entrepreneurs are kind of thinking in their heads, because they're pretty good at what they do, right? So, why not, think you're the best at making hires, because and the reality is you don't properly. But it's a hard thing for entrepreneurs to get over, that if you say, listen, you're not making good decisions, you're not making great hires. When it's actually obvious, right? They actually hired somebody that hired a CTO that just went south, and now you lost a quarter of your clients because you made a bad hire, and you didn't necessarily do what you should have done when you were actually talking to that CTO.
Right. So it looks to me, and I've seen it, by the way, I can fully relate to a lot of things that I've seen people doing.
Yeah.
But I would like maybe to go and correct me, Joel, if I'm wrong, like kind of blind spots, right? So, so what do you think like these blind spots, are, and is it like, and again, talking about perception, like I can relate to one thing and maybe you can give us more use cases. So for example, one of the things I've seen people doing, especially, when they are kind of a startup, so they go and hire someone from maybe a bigger company.
Yeah.
And they think, okay, if we bring this sales leader here, he gonna make magic, right? Or if we go and hire, let's go technical, a CTO, a VP of engineering, and like the guy would have like huge names under his belt.
Yeah.
He comes, and after a couple of months, if not, probably maybe 1 year maximum, it was a bad hire. So
You know,
I want to know why we fall in these blind spots, and maybe you can shed some light on, and maybe here where the assessments that you help organizations to do
yeah,
comes into the picture. So how we can avoid these blind spots.
yeah, that's a good point. The huge blind spot is that, especially for salespeople, by the way, salespeople will tell you that they're great at selling anything. So it doesn't matter which company they're in, doesn't matter what they're selling, they can do everything. And that is not true. It's exactly what you're saying, which is if you go from one company, it could be the same exact job title with the same exact job description, and you move them to another company with the same title, same job description. Those are not the same jobs. For example, that company may be in a different maturity level than somebody else. So, account executive IBM is not the same as account executive in a startup, even though the job title and description is exactly the same. It's very different. But we all fall into that trap that, like you're saying, it's got a whole bunch of, the resume is impressive. They're telling me, and they're really good at communication because they're great salespeople, that they can sell anything, and, I take their word for it. They come in and they fail. Because you as the owner didn't do the work that you needed to do to really identify exactly what the requirements are for your job. So don't look at the title, don't look at the job description, because frankly, those are all pretty bad anyway. You need to sit down and think realistically about what it is that you are going to need them to do and what skills and competencies they're going to need to do that. And then what that environment is that you're going to put them in. Because that has a huge impact. There's a person environment match in addition to a person job match. So when you do a person job, you look at the job, what's required. You see if the person has those things, but you also do the same thing for an environment. You see what are the major motivators and demotivators of that job. And by the way, you may be one of those demotivators as a manager, which sometimes I am a little bit, right? It's sort of perfectionist to some extent. But you need to be very realistic about what those are, because once you're talking to somebody, you need to ask them those questions. Simple as, hey, look, have you ever worked with a leader that's very, is a perfectionist? And how did that go? Did you like that? Did you not like that? Because when you get day one, you're going to deal with a perfectionist. Right? So I need to know if you've done that at some point, because, if you haven't, then it's going to be, a rude awakening for both of us. And so, but you as the owner, it is your responsibility as owner to figure out what those things are. And you're the only one that can do that. And you have to just look inward and be honest about what that's going to be, which is another blind spot, by the way. And that'll get us into perception in a second. But you have to just suck it up and go, listen, making money is more important than my ego. So I better be realistic that sometimes I'm the demotivator in this situation. So you have to figure out, what is your job? Don't look at the job description. Don't look at even AI. Don't trust the AI to tell you, because they don't know your business. They don't know who you are. They don't know who your customers are and your team. So you need to do this. And if you don't do this, you're gonna make a bad hire, and that's going to be really bad for you. Plus, you're going to pay this person a lot of money, so you're going to lose 10 months of salary for a salesperson. So forget your ego, sit down and actually list those, and get your team members to do the same thing, because you have to have that. You have to be very clear about that is, and then you can decide what sort of questions you're going to ask each individual candidate. What kind of assessments? We do recommend assessments because they're very objective, ways of showing you something that maybe you didn't even know and you didn't think of, because some of those assessments can bring out something that somebody doesn't want to tell you, or somebody that's a really good interviewer. They're telling you they're the greatest at teamwork. Okay, let me see if you are, and you can triangulate, use an assessment, role play, interview, to get a better idea of who they are and whether they fit this thing that you've created. And that's the way to maximize your predictive power. That's a better way of increasing the chances that that person is going to do well. So one, they're going to stay, and two, they're going to do well. Now, person environment fit tends to drive whether they stay.
Right.
Person job fit tends to drive whether they're going to do well. So people, yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, Joel. Like, where, because I want to go back to the thing about getting out of the ego. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to know where should they start? Like, what is the starting point for doing this? It's very important, I think.
Yeah. For looking at the profile itself and trying to figure out, well, there are tools, and by the way, we have them, and this is what we do with big companies. Because when you're hiring, no matter what it is, you need to first sit down and figure out what that is. You need to know what those skills are. You need to know what the competencies are. You need to know what the environment is like, and don't trust AI to do that. You can use AI to give you an initial list, and that's okay. But you are the only one that knows what the true requirements are of the job, what your environment is, what your motivators and demotivators are that job. So you have to, what we do is enlist other team members so that it's 5 of you deciding which competencies are required, which skills are required, which environment, characteristics or motivators are required. And so I have these 5 to 10 people answering the same questions, and then I put it all together so that now we know these 10 individuals said these 8 competencies are required. And they all said the same thing independently. And same thing for motivators and demotivators. So it's the tool, essentially. We call it a job profile. So it helps organizations get out of their heads. They actually see a list of these things so that they can actually make objective decisions. And then you have other people doing the same exact thing that you are, so that, when you come together and talk about it and the 5 individuals say the same thing and you say something else, well, that you're probably not correct, right? It's probably, these are the folks. So you need to use tools to help you do that. And for us, it's just a job profile. It just makes it easy. I send you a list of, your team members, your experts, send them a list of competencies, which ones are important for this job. You do the same thing, your other experts, and we bring it together and say, this is what everybody said. These are the competencies you required. So it's just a simple tool to help you do that. Otherwise, just sort of flying by, and you're going to trust AI to, tell you something that is probably not true for your company, especially if you're an entrepreneur. When you get trial AI, now you know that it's not correct, right? 70% might be okay, and 30% isn't. You just don't know which 30%. It's not which isn't. So, you need to use tools that actually provide some structure and help you do that. And again, for us, it's a job profile, because that is the foundation for everything we do in the job. It's not only selection, getting the people in, but it's also leadership development. You still need to have that profile that says, this is required of this particular role, and then maybe you do a 360. Then if you've done those, where you get a survey, same competencies your manager does, your peers do, your customers maybe, and they're rating you on the same competencies. So you have 8 competencies, and you're rating yourself on 1 to 5 on those 8, and then everybody else is rating you on the same competencies on that 5-point scale. And in the end, you get to see your manager said you were a 5, you said you were a 2. There's something, disconnected. Or you said you were a 5, your managers and your direct reports said you're a 2. So it's a good way to hold up a mirror. But it starts with that profile, that same profile that you created. And the performance management is the same exact thing. You have to still use that profile to have your manager, in that case, your manager, right where you are. And then succession planning is the 5th component, essentially. So you have to identify critical roles. Most companies, large companies have some kind of a, if your C-suite was hit by a bus, who could jump into those roles very quickly. So companies put a lot of effort in coming up with, for CEO, these are the 5 people that can jump in or, my VP of whatever, these are the 5 people connect. It's a session plan. But those are also driven by those profiles. So you can match the profile of that critical role to the nominees of that role. So profile, you got to get that right. And the only way to do that is to actually use a really simple tool to get you to do that. Otherwise, just flying blind, essentially. And you get that wrong, you get everything else wrong.
Right. Joel, out of curiosity, so
Yeah.
of course, like there are, you know this better than me. So there's a lot of psychological things here that goes in. One of that, and I always ask this question, especially when there's kind of, I've seen these kinds of, I would say, old style, I would say, kind of questionnaire that they ask you, and you gotta always, as a candidate, answer the best thing, right? So what is the way really to do some filtering here, and what's the best way, or like some of the strategies you really want this candidate to profile himself or herself in the most realistic way, back to reality? So what are like some of the techniques like you've seen it successful?
So it'll get into the perception to reality, component that I want to talk about in a little bit. Yes. Whenever I tell people what I do, they have the same reaction. Oh, you create those assessments that nobody wants to take, or you use that weird kind of questioning, in your interviews that are really hard to do. The answer is yes, we do. And by the way, we know that people are going to try to fake, the assessment. So there are items in there that give us a hint of whether, how you're actually responding to the assessment itself. So we kind of know that, hey, look, you're really trying to make yourself look great, or even on their side, you're really very critical of yourself, or somewhere in the middle. So, there are things baked into the assessments themselves that give you an insight on whether somebody's, trying to fool you in some sense. In an interview, we use more of a structured approach where you have very specific questions, essentially tied to the things you have to do on the job. I'm just sort of asking you if you've ever done that before, and tell me what happened, kind of thing. But the important part of it is that you have to use multiple pieces of information for that particular position. So you have a profile. Let's say you have 6 competencies. You should have 2 or 3 ways of measuring each one of those throughout the entire process. And, you're going to do, initial interviews, screens. You might have an assessment. You might have a better assessment. There's a role play down the road. You can have some interview questions. So you essentially need to have those 6 competencies and then just measure them in different ways. And if they all say the same thing, you can be pretty confident that it's true. So you're triangulating, getting as much information as possible in different ways. Because some people are just really good at interviewing, but if I have 3 other data points that say they're terrible team members, I'm going to have to trust that component, versus maybe even my own judgment that I'm, seeing before my eyes. So you have to triangulate. You have to use multiple pieces of information to get to the truth or reality, essentially.
Right. Joel, you mentioned something about, the process of, and I would like to call it the interviewing journey, right? So, so probably you start maybe with a talent acquisition, whether internal or external. So they have a setup of questions. Then you sit with the hiring manager, and then you sit with probably another peer, and then the final. Usually, the final step would be the role play or whatever. But I'm trying to be not kind of devil advocate here, but
please do.
So one of the things here is I gotta stop on the role playing little bit here.
Please.
So the role playing, especially in sales role, they do it a lot. So for the audience, and if you are like just a founder and you're gonna have, you're gonna hear this later from your CRO probably. So role playing. So you give a scenario, right? And then you ask the person to answer the questions, or maybe first to do a presentation a certain way. But again, sometimes, and we discuss this a lot, like how authentic I would call it, or like how
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah.
So it's a role playing at the end, right? So the guy, of course, he or she, they will try their best to give the best answers, right?
Yeah.
Are there like other things you would measure there? I mean, you talked about data points, and
Yeah.
I'm a tech
Yeah.
guy by
Yeah.
trade. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to know how we can collect really, in a role play interview,
Yeah.
these data points. I'm really curious.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I'm a data geek as well. And it's like, I don't know if you guys saw the movie Moneyball, in the US, essentially where the, professional baseball, a couple of decades ago, somebody finally figured out that if I take a bunch of data points, and maybe they don't look like they are matched or even go with each other, but if I use those data points, I can increase my probability of actually making, um, hiring somebody or recruiting somebody that actually does really well. That's exactly what we're doing now. To your point, there are good assessments that are out there, and there are some really terrible assessments that are out there. And role plays, you have to be fairly careful on how that is structured. So there are some key components of a role play that you need to have in order for it to actually give you good information. Now, we come across a lot of sales executives that say, all right, for my sales candidate, I just go and say, here's a pin. Why don't you go and sell this pin? Go ahead. And then it's just wide open. Or they give you a sentence or a paragraph, like a background, and say, okay, go ahead and sell this or try to get into the role. Those are terrible assessments. They're terrible personality tests. They're terrible IQ assessments. They're terrible interview questions. So you have to be fairly careful on whether this assessment is actually set up fairly correctly. It's not rocket science, by the way, but we do help a lot of companies, and even our clients come to us and say, hey, this vendor came and said this is the great test. What do you think? And you look at it and you go, wow, this is horrible. So there's people like me that you can go ask for advice, but there are good assessments and there are terrible assessments. And role plays are a big issue because a lot of companies build their own role plays, which and our clients do the same thing, by the way. And sometimes to look at us going, don't even waste your time. You're not gonna get anything good out of it. Then you're gonna make the candidate feel terrible, and they're looking at you and going, I have no idea why this is even relevant. If you're asking me, and all of a sudden you as a candidate, don't like the company, and I'm not going to buy from you, kind of a thing. So you have to be really careful that you're setting up the right assessment, and it's a decent assessment, and it can actually tell you what you want to measure. It's one of the components. When we're building assessments, you have to follow certain procedures to make sure that they're actually measuring what they're measuring. If I say they're measuring team role or team relationships, I should make sure that test is measuring that for you and for somebody else and for somebody else. It's just you just have to do some steps to make sure that it's actually doing that. And a lot of people don't, especially with AI. These days it's, I can just create an assessment and maybe it looks kind of cool, but you have no idea if it actually works, right? Just because it looks cool. So you have to be careful. Role plays are good assessment, but you got to make sure that it's working. Maybe the ones that you had were really simple, where they just threw out a scenario and said, Mehmet, go ahead, tell me, come up with your own response or whatever. Those are terrible. They don't measure anything besides maybe your communication style, I guess. But there are differences in terms of assessments. It's like everything else, right? There are different qualities of software packages, for example. Some are good and some aren't. Tech stacks and kind of okay, some are not, or they sort of don't work together. So it's just that making sure you're assessing the right things. And again, it ties back to that profile. So you got to be fairly careful on what you're picking as an assessment. But people like me can spot them fairly quickly. Is this okay? No, that's terrible. Don't do that one. If you want to do that, you should probably use this one over here. from this vendor that's been doing it for, 50 years kind of thing. And they know what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, there's also one point which always, it's kind of a cliche, I know. So
Yeah.
people talks about the culture, right? So the company culture. And one of the things they say, okay, we're gonna see, or like usually you hear this when they give the candidate the results. Oh, we found out like you are, fit for the company culture, or oh,
Yeah.
we think you are not, fit for our culture. So
Yeah.
when doing the assessment here, so where is the reality and where is the perception about the culture and fitting
Yeah.
in the culture?
So I do see that quite a bit where, companies are wanting to, most big companies have their own, they've developed their own values or, their own culture or their own principles, that essentially everybody should have that's coming into the organization. But if you're a Fortune 500, you come up with the values or principles. That is not, I worked at Verizon Communication for, many years back then. I had no idea what the mission was or the culture or the values. What I didn't know was the culture and values of my immediate area, my immediate environment. So my manager, my coworkers, the job itself, the sort of extended individuals that are around me. That's, things that are closer to you are the things that impact your behavior. So I hate when people say we're going to measure company culture in your Fortune 500, and that culture has nothing to do with, the environment you're going to put them in because it's so far away. They're not going to know what that is, right? So when you're doing this, you should really use the environment that's close to you. That's what impacts your behavior, not something that, somebody created 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It doesn't make any sense. So when you're building these things, don't look at the company culture, look at the immediate culture, because that's what impacts your behavior.
That's interesting. Now, this is like for me, Joel, it looks like also it's a mindset, right? So
Yeah.
it's having this mindset. So leaders, how they can prepare, probably if they are a small company, maybe the owner, the CEO, they would be doing the hiring at the beginning by themselves.
Yeah.
That's easy. I'm not easy in a sense it's easy, but I mean, it's like one person who needs to have this mindset.
Yeah.
But later on, they're going to start to have teams and leaders. So how do you bring that? And you're talking about like Fortune 500 companies. So how to spread this culture, I would say, I would call it culture by itself, or let's say mindset, sorry, in acquiring this methodology of systematically doing the assessments and, making sure that they are doing the right thing. Because again, back to perception and reality.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, and you just mentioned at the beginning, Joel,
Yeah.
the aim of every company is to get revenue and make money, right? It's not just to entertain people.
Yeah.
So how we kind of put this mindset into the hiring managers that they're going to start to hire their team, whether it's on the sales side or maybe on the technology side, doesn't matter, I think.
Yeah.
So what you have seen work good for companies?
Yeah. You have a culture, you just don't know what it is, maybe. You've created a culture. You've created an environment. Like I've created an environment. I may or may not know all the motivators and demotivators of the environment, but I have created it, right, in my own company. So it's there. So at least initially, you need to understand what it is. And, you as a leader need to know that maybe it's not in your head. Like you don't necessarily know that it is. You have to allow your people to tell you what it is, and you not get upset about somebody telling you that, you're micromanaging. And I hate it. Okay, I'm sorry. You have to sort of back off. So there's a humility component that you have to get over, because you need to be realistic about what it is that, what your environment is, if you're going to hire somebody into that environment, because that has a huge impact on what they do and they don't do. I'm a huge motivation guy. My dissertation was on person, environment, motivational fit. So there are certain things that motivate me in general, and they're demotors and motivators of the job itself. So you as a leader need to know what those are. And then when I'm talking to you, I need to figure out where you are as a candidate against those things. It's pretty simple though. And again, we offer a way to quickly do that because there are only about 18 or so motivators and demotivators. That's about it. So you as a leader can go through and go, no, we don't have that. We don't have that. You have a lot of this competition. No, we don't have that. We don't have that. So you can quickly go through. So when somebody's coming in, you're saying, hey, what do you think about competition? Have you ever worked where, people are just sort of, going at each other? Because, when they jump in the company, there's a lot of competition. So it's the same thing as competencies or skills. They're motivators, demotivators. You just have to be realistic about those are, and be okay with your team coming and telling you the good and bad. Because, best practice in general is to tell the candidate what those are. We call it a realistic job preview. Like, I need to be very honest with the candidate and tell them, this is the cool stuff about what this role is. These are the not so great things about the role. And you need to be honest with them about that. So that they can decide, because in general, they're going to say, no, I love it. I love it. I love it. But you have to be really realistic and go, I'm serious. You're going to run into this. You're not going to like it probably, unless you're motivated with this kind of thing. You just need to be realistic of it is, or you're going to, make a bad decision because you're just not comfortable admitting that maybe something is bad in your environment.
Right. I think, Joel, one of the positive outcomes for doing it this way is, of course, getting the best talent plus getting less what we call it attrition ratios, which is people coming in and leaving up a couple of months, and this is where the loss comes in. So, and of course, you are in the HR tech, right? So you touch base on the AI part. I got it. But maybe other than the AI, like where the technology can also, and maybe some of the things that currently you do, so maybe some other aspects of the technology that can really help in all this and bringing the reality out together from perception.
Yeah. I think simplicity is a big thing that you should be just in all tech. But, in HR tech, the way we think about it is a number of clicks. That's our philosophy. How many clicks does it take you to do this? How many clicks does it take you to do this? How many clicks does it take you to this? And everything we do and all of the UIs and the UX on the user side, we consider that. We think number of clicks lead to terrible user experience. So we remove as many clicks as possible from that screen because it doesn't matter how great your process is, doesn't matter how great your assessments are. If it's a very complex process, your value goes right at the window. So you have to keep things really simple to do this, not only on the candidate side, because you're concerned about their experience. Because again, if you give them bad experience, they're not going to buy from you. It's just this the way it goes, right? If Walmart treats you badly as a customer, you're not going to go there. You're going to go to Target or somewhere else. Right? So you have to be, careful about that. But it's also a lot of value on your side. I'm actually going to get people to use it, and I'm actually going to get my hiring managers to use it so they can make better decisions. But if I make things really complex for them, they're not going to use it. Even though it's a great tool, if you put too many clicks in there, they're not going to use it. So for us, it's that. And it sounds like a simple concept, but you just go out and look at any HR tech that's out there. And, any of the big companies, that you probably seen out there, everybody talking about simplicity, but I want to look at the screen, there are 100, buttons, there are 100 words, a whole bunch of menu options, when, for us, we think in terms of number of clicks, but also what are the things you need to do all the time versus things that I need to do every week or things that I need to do every 3 weeks or every month. And the things that you need to do all the time, that's what I put in front of you. and everything else I sort of layer behind the scenes. But, a lot of people, users, especially if you're asking for their feedback, they're going to want to put a lot of buttons and, words and instructions and icons and whatever on the page. And we have to fight sometimes and go, no, I'm not going to put that on there for you. Because number one, I'm going to have to ask you, whether you want a button, and what color do you want the button, and what word do you want in the button, and what do you want it to do when you click that button on the back end. And then I'm going to build it, and then I'm going to train you to use that button. And then I have to take a support call from you that says, hey, what is this button? So for me, I'd rather say, I'm not going to put that button in there for you. And, it's also, it's selfish because, if you don't like that button, you're not going to say as a customer, you know what, I'm the one that told you to put the button. They're going to look at me and go, you put the button on there. So for me, we strip everything off the UIs and we keep as much as possible off the screen. Buttons, words, fields, we remove them. It's a number of clicks philosophy. So simplicity. And, if somebody says their technology is simple, but they have to train you for 2 weeks, it's not simple. Right. Or if I have to give you, have to, set out a whole academy, so that with how-to videos, because, I know that everybody, doesn't understand how to do this. They have to use how-to videos. Well, then it's not simple, right? And everything we do in, HR tech is not that complex. It's not rocket science, right? But, we get trapped into complexity, and complexity kills value. That was a long answer to your short question, but it doesn't matter how great you do everything I'm talking about, the profiles, the assessments, each step of the way, you're doing everything you want. But then if I make everything really complex, that means a lot of buttons. Doesn't matter. We talk in terms of predictive validity, predictive power. So there's certain things you do, in the process that increase your predictive power, your probability. So if you use an assessment, your probability goes up. If you use the proper role play, the proper one, it goes up. If you use an interview, it goes up. So we know what those are. But again, if my process is really complex, it doesn't matter how good they are. My hiring manager is not going to use it because it's too complex and doesn't really create a value for them. And that means clicks. You got to set these up. You have to understand the science behind what you're using, but you also have to set up your technology so that people actually use it. I mean, that's a simple concept. And by the way, business psychologists like me like complexity also. So, I have to constantly fight my own profession and go, don't you want people to use your assessment? It's a course. Well, then why do you make them click 10 times to get the report? That doesn't make a lot of sense, because that's the most important part, for them, is for them to see the report, and you make it really difficult for them to see it. That doesn't make sense, to me. If you want people to use it, you should make it simple, and then they can see the value and then go, wow, I need to use more of this. It's pretty simple. But, psychologists are not that, I'm not that.
Yeah, but I started to remember, when I used to apply for jobs like years ago, and people, they were saying like you are very selective. So without mentioning names, if I hit on a company career website where they have these kinds of questions, and they are like very long, boring, small fonts, like, it used to give me a depression, and I used to say, you know what? I don't want to be working there, because it seems like these guys, they have a lot of complexities.
Yes.
Right? And people used to say, hey, like, you're very selective, like, like, it's a blue chip company, and this is the place it should be. I said, no. Thank you very much, because if their hiring process starts like this, this gave me like a negative vibes, right? So I can relate a lot with this, Joel. Joel, as we're coming, close to the end, I want to, kind of final maybe words from you about this perception and reality regarding this topic, and of
Yeah.
course, like how people can, get engaged and,
Yeah.
reach out to you.
Yeah, well, you got me talking about my other passion, which is my still helping companies make better, better hires. Uh, yeah, but what we found, as we're helping a lot of companies build these profiles, and for different roles, executives, sales, individuals, HR, IT, folks. What we found is that there is one skill that tends to differentiate the really outstanding performers versus even the average performers or slightly above performers. And there's one thing, and it's their perception of reality. And, everybody says perception is reality. And for some reason, they think that's true. And the reality is, it is not true. It is your reality. And you can even get people to admit, yes, it's my reality. But if it's what happens, whatever your reality is the way you behave. And I can get people to admit that, yeah, absolutely. It's my perception of reality. It's my reality. And yes, it's going to drive what I do. And I'm always asking, are you sure your perception of reality is correct? How do you know it's correct? What if you're way off? Well, what you do is way out. So there's just some people, and those are the very excellent performers. I challenge you to look at all of your whoever your employees are, whether it's sales or executives, and see if their perception of reality is just a little bit closer. And you can tell by the way they're talking, right? They just have a better understanding of what's happening in that conversation or in that meeting, or when you're, trying to, just in general, just talking to them, they just have a better grasp. And I don't know how many times I've sat around a room and just sort of realized that, wow, that person has a better idea of what is really happening than I do. And they're like, this is what happened in the past. And because this is what happened in the past, I know this is what's happening. And because this is happening, I have a decent idea of what's going to happen in the future. They just pay attention to that information. So they have a better view of what's really going on. And if they have a better view of what's going on, they have a better chance of doing well. Because, like in a sales process, if you believe you're the first, you're leading the sales process, but you're actually the fifth, then you're going to behave like you're the first, and you're going to just derail your sale because you think you're the first, so you behave like you're the first. That happens with everything, executives, wherever technology folks, for sure. But I guess the good thing is that it's a skill that you can go from whatever your perception is to reality. And what we've done, and maybe this is another podcast, but I've actually created a kind of an acronym, I guess. And I play. My wife and I play a lot of poker, and she's a much better poker player than I am, by the way. And I'm just sort of average. But what I did look around, and I got into it and just read a lot of books, and they're the masters of going from perception to reality are the masters in poker. They are masters of going from whatever perception is to the actual reality. And some people are so good, they can tell you where your cards are without even seeing them. Without even, if you're watching the poker, on TV or whatever, some people are going, I think you have an ace king. And the other person going, holy smokes, how do they know an ace king? It's because of that, right? They do certain things to figure out, what it is that you have. So they do these 5 things, and it's P.O.K.E.R. essentially. So these are the skills that you can do to go from perception to actual reality. Number 1, the P is that they play the player, not the cards. Like, it doesn't really matter what cards they're holding. They're sort of behaving based on who you are and based on what you've done in the past. And they know that 2 months ago, you acted this way when you had the same exact hand, or 3 months ago, you did the same thing. So the people who are good at understanding reality have a sense of what that is. They kind of know who you are. They know who the other team members are, especially in sales. You got to know who that is, because once you know that, then I know how to behave. I have a better idea of why you're doing what you're doing, right? Why are you talking to me the way you're talking to me, kind of thing. Okay, that's two. So it doesn't necessarily matter how in the sales process how great your solution is. It's pretty good. You don't do that. You actually play the individuals that are in that conversation. Say with an executive. Okay. O is in poker. There's a thing called the tilt. Getting on tilt. That means if you're in a hand and somebody has a 1% chance of beating you because they just need one card on the last card, and then get the one card. That'll spin you out of control. You just go on what's called on tilt, right? So for us, you have to know, one, what triggers you to do that spiral, and number two, understand when you're in that to get out of that as quickly as possible. Because whatever you do, when you're in that spiral, and it's sad to look at, and frankly, I've been there myself, where I'm on tilt and I'm just making horrible decisions, but the pros around you are going, Joel's on tilt, I'm going to push him because he's going to make some bad decisions, right? So I have to know, one, that killed me. And then two, I got to get out of that quickly. That's okay, is that you have to know your table image. You have to know what other people think of you. When you do that, then you have a better understanding of why they're acting the way they are towards you and why they're saying what they're saying towards you. Because they could be saying the same thing to one of your colleagues, but it means different. So the same exact thing that they're doing with your colleague, they're doing to you means something different because they think of you in a certain way. What do they think? You're just you're nuts. You have no idea. So everything they do is going to be based on that, right? Because that's what they believe, right? That you're not, whatever they do, whatever they say is going to impact that because that's the way they believe of it. So it's a holding up the mirror, but you should know what that is at all times, right? And it's hard, right? Sometimes you're creating a perception, or it's hard. But the reality is people are making assumptions and impressions about you. You should have a decent idea of what those are. The E is actually exert pressure. Like in poker, exerting pressure is much, much better than sitting back. So my wife is really good at this. She's like okay with just pushing money in and letting you make the decision. Like, she could be bluffing, she could be not, who knows? But she knows that you're kind of iffy because she's watching you, and she's going to push out money and just wait for you to make that decision. She's okay with pushing you. So in whatever you do, action is much, much better. And even better, focused action is the way to do it. The R, by the way, is you have to learn how to read your own hand. Like you have to actually know that aces are, the best whatever initially, but then when the cards come up, all of a sudden that probability changes because something just happened. Same thing in life, same thing in sales. You think you're leading today, and then the client does something, and all of a sudden your probability is different now. And then something else happens. Now the probability is now different. You have to know, just in general, that your perception is a little off. You have to know that. And then you have to do one of those things, the P, the O, the K, E, or the R, to get you back to that reality. Now, it's easier said than done, by the way. But it is a trip. It is a skill. Some of it's nature, but you can actually do something about it to get you, to get you there.
Right. It's really, I like, when things goes this direction, philosophical, I would say, and psychology, plus hiring, because although like I'm as I told you, tech by trade, but what I have discovered, especially the past, 2 years, speaking to people, doing this podcast, it's all about the human interactions, right? So And what you just mentioned, and the mindset of having the poker players, it looks like the poker player mindset is
Yeah.
applicable in many things in life. Of
That's
course,
right.
I'm not promoting gambling, guys, but so the same
Yeah.
thing, when especially because I studied a lot about, for example, also like how VC works, right? So
Yeah.
so they apply kind of a poker player mindset, taking
Yeah.
risks, and being able to read the other side. So I believe everything is interconnected, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and your work here, Joel, is really outstands behind the noise, I would say. And I've seen something on your website which
Yeah.
also attracted me about all the BS which are like other people talks about, and getting to the real things. And this is at the end. What I liked about what you just the similarities that you just mentioned, it all comes back to the benefit of the company and making money and making everyone successful, which is to me like really this is what we should be always doing. How people can get in touch and start this transformation journey to
Well, the quick way is to go to LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, it's you just type in Joel Quintela, JOELQUINTLA is probably the fastest way to get a hold of me. Just connect with me, and I'll reach out and see if you want to learn more about this stuff, especially perception of reality.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the best predictors of performance, no matter what
it's thought-provoking, honestly. And
Yeah.
to me, like as you noticed, like, and maybe the audience would notice that a lot of things started to come to my mind while you're speaking, because I start to relate. It's really the way that we have been looking at all the time.
It's pretty straightforward. Even my wife comes and she's really good at poker, but less okay in real life. So she doesn't actually translate what she does in poker to sometimes in real life. And sometimes, she'll come and say, "Hey, listen, my whatever said this and whatever said this." And I'm always saying, "Well, isn't that what she usually does? Doesn't she say that all the time in this situation?" And I have to go, yeah, she does. Women, what? She's doing exactly what she should be doing. If she doesn't do that, something is wrong, right? But in everyday life, this is, you have to know that you have an understanding of reality. And if you don't, you need to, do whatever you can to get there.
Absolutely. Joel, it was really a very good time that I have spent today, talking to you and learning a lot from you. For the audience, they don't need to go and search. I will make the life easy. I put the link for your LinkedIn profile and the website also in the show notes if they are listening on their favorite podcasting app. And if they are watching this on YouTube, they will find the description. So thank you, Joel, very, very, very much for the time today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is for the audience. Before we close, I'm gonna do my short closing. This is for the audience, guys. If this is your first time listening to me or watching us, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. Please do subscribe and, of course, share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the fans that keeps coming and send me their feedback, thank you very, very, very much. Like this year, we're doing really good on the top 200 charts globally. We are entering multiple countries at the same time. And also we've been selected as one of the most listened podcasts in Dubai, which is also an honor that I had, all because of the support of you. And as I said always, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Amazing.
Hit that subscribe button. Share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs. And leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.